Okay, I think everyone is in. Welcome, everyone. This is the National Association of Japanese Canadians online session. We're very pleased to have our special guest, Kelvin Higo, and we're going to be talking about, well, a lot of things from the Sea and Shore Cookbook for one, and also Japanese Canadian stories of Steveston. My name is Lorene Oikawa. I'm president of the National Association of Japanese Canadians, and I'm very pleased to be here on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Semiahmoo, Katsi, Coquitlam, Kwantlen, Kikite, and Tawasan First Nations. And I know that we raise up our hands and give thanks to First Peoples, who are the traditional keepers of the lands and waters where we all live and work and learn. So thank you very much, and let's get going. So I'd like to introduce Kelvin Higo. He's actually probably doesn't need an introduction. You probably already know he's a leader in Steveston, and he's involved in so many projects. And his most recent project is to collect stories and recipes from the sea and shore. So Kelvin, welcome.
Thank you. If we can start the slideshow.
Yes, so I will share.
Now, before I begin my presentation, I'm just going to give a brief family history and a short history of our involvement in the local community. To my knowledge, Steveston is the only intact community to return to their pre-war home and reestablish themselves. I think currently in Richmond, we have about 3,800 persons of Japanese ancestry living here. And we're still quite an active community, even though our numbers are beginning to diminish. So I want to just begin with a bit of my family history. If you can hit the next slide. My father on the left is Frank Yukio Higo, and his brother Ted Yukinori Higo. The family was raised at Acme Cannery, which was located on Sea Island near where the current hovercraft station resides. My grandfather, Saicho Higo, came here from Ibusuki, Kagoshima Prefecture in 1904. My dad was born on Acme Cannery in 1918 and passed away a few years ago at the age of 92. Next slide. This is my grandma and grandfather Higo. Like I said, they came here in 1904. And the interesting story is my grandmother came about a year later, and my grandfather picked her up at the Vancouver Harbor, and they walked home along Granville Street to Marpole. And about halfway home, my grandmother, who was carrying my aunt, said, can she take her shoes off? And her brother, who was with her, said, no, we're now in Canada. You have to abide by the customs. And so with sore feet, she made it to Marpole. And that's quite a trek, from Vancouver Harbor to Marpole. Next slide. And during the war, we ended up in the sugar beet farms of Alberta, outside of Lethbridge. And that's my grandmother on the left. And she was in her 60s at the time. And on the right is my aunt, Patricia. And they were both workers on the sugar beet farms, as everybody had to participate in that activity. Next slide. Next. And here is my mom and dad. They were married. They met through a go-between in Alberta, and this is them in Winnipeg, probably 3 or 4 years after they had been married. Next slide. And this is where I was born. Next. We returned in my father returned in 1949, and then the rest of the family came in 1950. And this is Pacific Coast Camp, where we ended up in about 1951 and lived there till 1967. And in the background, you'll see on the left, the silver building. That's the Yamanaka Boat Works. No, further to your right there, the two silver buildings in the back. And the one on the right is the Itagi Boat Works. And if you see the slanted roof house on the very right, top right there, that's the house I grew up in. And a lot of the boats you see in the forefront are are all owned by Japanese fishermen. And like I say, we lived there till 1967 and lived a very idyllic life. Next slide. And this is my father's boat. He had a boat prior to the war, as everybody did. And he built this boat in, I think, 1953, 54, and named it after my sister, Christine H. And this is being launched at Pacific Coast Camp. And fortunately, the canneries would participate in trying to reestablish the Japanese fishermen, and they would hold a mortgage, just like a house, on the boat, and provided some of the earnings every year went to pay back the cannery, and provided that the fishermen fish for that cannery and deliver their fish to them. Next slide. Now, I want to talk about the community development. We talked about the injustice and the racism perpetuated on the Japanese community, but once the Japanese Canadians came back, they really contributed to the betterment of our community. But I want to go back to the start of this story. It started in the late 1870s with the arrival of Manzo Nagano in 1877, and he's recognized as the first Japanese immigrant to BC. And by 1887, there was about 30 Japanese in BC. But one of the most notable ones was TK Homa, Tomikichi Homa, who arrived here in 1883, and he helped establish the Japanese Fishermen's Benevolent Society that fought for the rights of the fishermen for wages and the price of salmon, etc. And he also was he fought for the franchise for the Japanese Canadians. And sadly, he died in an internment camp in Slocan before he realized his fight was successful in 1949. Can I have the next slide? I'm not sure if I have a slide of that. There's the hospital. Anyways, the next person that was of note was Gihei Kuno, who came here in 1887 from Miyomura, Japan, the Wakayama Prefecture. And he encouraged about 250 other visitors to come to Steveston. And most of the Japanese here in Steveston, other than myself, because I'm from Kagoshima roots, can trace their roots back to those first 250 immigrants. As they got established, they soon saw a need to start having some community facilities. And so they built a hospital in 1900. As a result of a typhoid outbreak a year or so earlier, a temporary hospital was set up in a church at Phoenix Cannery. And so they decided they needed a permanent hospital and built that. And it was based on the principle of socialized medicine. Religion is another important facet of, you can go to the next slide. Religion is another important facet. And this is the Japanese congregation in 1928. And this property was previously owned by or occupied by the Star Hotel, and the Japanese community purchased this in 1928. The hotel was destroyed in a fire, the Great Fire of Steveston in 1919. And this first Buddhist temple existed until the Japanese were evacuated in 1942, and it later became the Steva Theater and operated until 1960. And I used to go to the theater when I was a child. This building is still standing. It is used by local retailers. Next building, or next slide. This is a picture of the Steveston United Church Kindergarten. This was jointly developed by the Women's Fujinkai, or auxiliary, to have a kindergarten and preschool for the children of the cannery workers and the fishermen. And as a result of the success in the schools, local schools, integrating their programs. Next slide. In 1922, the school board came to the Japanese community, asked to help them build some additional classrooms onto the school. And this is the old Lord Byng School Annex, has 4 classrooms. And the Japanese contribute to the 2 classrooms, provided the Japanese could attend public school. Prior to that, when the school board was developed or established in 1916, the school children couldn't attend public school because the parents had to be property owners. And as most of the Japanese lived in carrying homes, they weren't allowed to go to public school. So the Japanese Fishermen's Benevolent Society built a school on their property where the hospital was located, and ran a school there for several years before they were allowed to attend this school. Next slide. In 1930, they soon realized that the annex had outlived its size and they need to expand. And so the Japanese community lobbied the BC government to build a school, a larger school. And so this 14-room classroom, again, this is where I went to school, elementary school, as did many other Steveston residents. They agreed to cost share the building of the school. So the provincial government contributed $20,000. The local Japanese community raised $20,000. And the local school board contributed $8,000 for equipment and furnishings. And on the promise that the school board would allow the Japanese Canadian community to use the school after hours to teach Japanese. Next slide. We now go post-war. The Japanese have started to return starting April 1st, 1949. And when the Japanese returned, they used to have what they called the Japanese Methodist Church, which was located at the corner of number 1 and Chatham Street, which is just east of this building. This is the building as it was in 1953. And so the United Church allowed the Japanese congregation to meet in their building prior to their own congregation meeting later in the day. But in 1953, both congregations decided to join together and became one. And this is the first instance of an integrated congregation in Canada. And this building still stands and is owned by the Richmond Hospital Auxiliary, and it's operated as a thrift store. Next slide. This is the old, the Steveston Buddhist temple upon their return to Steveston. And this building was previously the kindergarten picture building that you saw earlier. And the Buddhist congregation purchased this building in 1956 and began or reestablished their temple. Next slide. Most importantly, after having been in exile for a number of years, when the Japanese came back, they immediately threw themselves into the community, and several of the members from our community joined the Steveston Community Society. In Richmond, community associations are responsible for running the community centers on a partnership basis. And so when the community decided to build the first community center in Richmond, the Japanese were also thinking about building a community and had asked BC Packers to donate some land. The president of the BC Packers company, Ken Fraser, came to our community and asked our elders if they would come together and join us in building a joint community center. And after much deliberation, the Japanese community agreed and decided to throw whatever funds they had, which is amounted to about $15,000, into the construction of this community center. In return, one room would be dedicated for the use of judo, and the gym could be used by the Kendo Club. Next slide. This collaboration continued, and in 1972, as the BC Centennial Project, the idea came to build a dojo for judo and kendo. And actually, this was proposed by a Caucasian person who was a member of our kendo club, Jim Murray. Most of us, had thought, this is just build a standard Japanese garden to commemorate And, but Jim, who was an active kendoka, thought that a dojo would be more appropriate. And this was spearheaded by the two martial arts groups, and they raised a total of $95,000 of the total $237,000 budget. A few years ago, they had to re-roof the cedar shingles on this building, and I think it cost over $200,000 just to re-roof. So you can understand how costs have gone up over the years. This center was officially opened in March of 1972, and it was at that time, and we still think so, the first purpose-built dojo built outside of Japan. Next slide. Next. One of the other things that the community got behind was the building of Kuno Garden in 1988. This is located at Gary Point Park, which is a very at the very entrance of the Fraser River. You'll see that just in the background there. And this was built by the Wakayama Kenjinkai and commemorates the 100th anniversary of the arrival of Gihei Kuno. Next slide. This is one I'm particularly proud of because I was the chairman of the building committee for this facility in 1992. And this was built as a result of our approach to the Redress Foundation. And we made a presentation and felt that Steveston was one of the two epicenters of the Japanese community, and we deserved a portion of the redress monies that were given to us by the federal government. And in 1992, this was officially open. We also received monies from the provincial government through their Grow BC grant and from the city of Richmond. And this operates for any group that wants to participate with the Japanese community getting a priority of use. Next picture. Next. In 2000, the Wakayama Kenshinkai has planted over 300 cherry trees at Gary Point. And in fact, as we speak, they're blooming very vigorously. And I'm hoping in a day or so we can get a better picture. And this also initiated in 2017, the Sakura Matsuri. This year, again, because of COVID, we're going to do a virtual celebration, but normally we would have large tents and everything else at Gary Point to celebrate the Sakura Matsuri. And that, again, is being sponsored by the Wakayama Kenshinkai. That's my father-in-law who's passed away, Toshio Morao, and the plaque is behind him that was dedicated commemorating the planting of those trees. Next slide. This is a memorial or statue just west of Britannia National Historic Site, and commemorates the contribution of the Japanese fishermen to the BC fishing industry. And this was dedicated in 2002. And this was the third project undertaken by the Nikkei Fishermen's Committee. The first was a reunion of the fishermen. The next was the production of two books titled The Nikkei Fisherman on the BC Coast and The Spirit of the Nikkei Fleet. And both books are still available today through Nikkei Place Bookstore. Next. I was also involved as chairman of this project, and this is the Seastay Nikkei Memorial, and this was built in 2019, and it commemorates the removal of the Japanese from the coast, but more importantly, their return. And on the left triangular rock, you'll see a brass location titling Steveston, and on the right rock, you'll see locations where people were sent to internment camps, places in Alberta, and as far east as Angler. And then the pavement depicts the type of artwork done by our seniors to make crafts. And it was a community project done jointly with the city of Richmond. Next. And this is our last project the community, Japanese community, have been involved with. This was mainly hosted by the Steveston Buddhist Temple, utilizing excess property they had behind their temple. I'm currently the chairman of the board of this Nikkei seniors, or not, it's not Nikkei senior, but it's a seniors independent housing development. And it's a 107 bed suite unit. And we're about just over halfway to filling this facility. COVID has slowed us down a bit, but the feedback so far is that it's been well received. It's right on the north side of our Steveston Park property, right across from the Japanese Cultural Center. And so far, like I say, the reviews have been great, and we look forward to having this completely filled shortly. Anyways, that gives you a bit of background to some of the work that we've been doing here in Steveston over the years. And I'd like to go, if Lorraine, I can put my other presentation up. We'll have questions at the back. I've got 2 slideshows here that I hadn't intended doing, but I want to talk now about the cookbook project that we did that most of you have signed up for, but I want to give you a bit of background to the project. Maybe you can just put the main slide up. This project, actually, we first called it From the Sea because we were hoping that most of the recipes would be from the ocean. But then as we realized, as we went through the seasons, that there were a lot of recipes from the shore or gardens. And we started this in 2019. Unfortunately, we ran into COVID, which allowed us the time to gather the recipes and work on the book. And as we began this project, it was the logistics that were the first challenge. And I immediately thought to partner with Tonari Gumi, which is the Vancouver Japanese Volunteers Association in Vancouver, because they had produced 2 other books, Home Away from Home and Our Edible Roots. And I thought this would be a companion book to that. They also had access to resources that I didn't have. They were familiar with the publisher they used in Manitoba. They had access to a graphic artist, Miki Miyano, who we quickly enlisted to help us on our project. And then the next thing that came up is that we soon became apparent that we needed an editor. And I was fortunate enough to have a cousin who worked in the publishing business and did other things. And I talked her into coming on board and being our editor. Most importantly, I enlisted my wife. As we wanted to cook all the recipes to ensure that the amounts and the process was clearly understood by others making these recipes. And so she basically cooked 95% of all the recipes. And fortunately, we had my father-in-law living with us, the person you saw earlier in the other slideshow. And so we tried out all the recipes on him. Unfortunately, he was like Mikey from that commercial, and he would eat anything. So we were never quite sure whether the recipes were good or he was just happy to be fed regularly. Next slide. Next. This is the book cover of the book, and when I saw this picture, my friend had this picture, and because I had fished with my father, this was so reminiscent of what we were trying to accomplish. These communal potluck meals that the fishermen used to have out on the fishing grounds. And the nice thing about this picture is that I know everybody but the person who's on the left with his back to you. I quite couldn't recognize him, but most of these are, there's 3 of the Samishima brothers. There's a Matsumura, there's a Morao, and there's a Hori. And like I say, my dad fished with all these people, so I thought it was quite appropriate to have these people on the cover of this book. And one of the things we tried to do was to try to come up with recipes for comfort food that you would, this recipes in this book are not French cuisine or anything like that. They would be really common foods that we would have had day to day that sustained us. As you know, most of the people that came back were really on the poor side. I never realized I was poor living in a Camry home because everybody else, lived in the same situation. But as we started this project, the first obstacle we had was to try to find the recipes. We had thought that most of the Nisei would be willing to share some of their recipes, or we could find recipe books. A lot of these recipes are not written down. And as we talked to the Nisei, who are now in their late 80s and 90s, they would say that they don't remember, or you just added a bit of this and a bit of that. And we realized very quickly that if every recipe just stated that you added a little bit of this and a little bit of that, we'd have a very short cookbook. Fortunately, I had quite a few friends in the fishing industry that were sansei, or third generation, and I was able to connect with them. And I started looking for very specific people. Like, I was able to interview the oldest sansei fisherman that still fishes. I was able to interview the youngest fisherman of Nikkei heritage, the first seiner fisherman. So I was trying to get fairly unique people to contribute. As well, I was fortunate to have other people submit their recipes. Next slide. As I mentioned, I had to enlist my wife, and that's her on the left, with my two other grandchildren. And she was charged with making sure the aji, or taste, was proper. In the early stages, we would always run our aji taster by her mom, but unfortunately she passed away during this project. And again, this slide kind of demonstrates the intergenerational transfer of knowledge, which was one of our objectives when we made a grant to the New Horizons for funding to do this project. As well as doing these personal type things, we hosted several Zoom classes and taught. We had 2 Zoom sessions and taught probably about 6 to 8 recipes over Zoom. We wanted to do person-to-person instructions because we thought that was more effective, but unfortunately, because of COVID, we're unable to do this. If you have the book, or you do get the book, please read Masako Fukawa's foreword, where she mentions, and I quote, "Food is a common denominator between the elder and younger generations. It evokes pleasant memories. The sharing of food is a social bridge between generations." And I thought she encapsulated the intent of the book so nicely in that foreword. We also dedicated this book to the Japanese Canadian mothers, grandmothers, and great-grandmothers whose resilience is the foundation of our Steveston community. And not only the Steveston community, but when you think about it, during the internment years and prior, they were the mainstays in the community. When the husbands and older sons were taken away, when they were sent to internment camps, the mothers and grandmothers had to keep the families together, feed and house the children, and try to keep the family together. And this not only applied in the internment camps, but also where we were in Alberta. And upon their return, they had to try to reestablish themselves, make sure the children were enrolled in school. They actually went and maintained the household, as well as worked in the cannery or elsewhere while the fishermen were away fishing. And so we give a lot of credit to the women for their resilience and perseverance in supporting the community. I also think about them supporting all the fundraising activities, such as our Kendo Club and Judo Club and Buddhist Temple Bazaars, and doing all the back-breaking cooking for those events. Next slide. Next slide. Here's a picture of our Nikkei Seniors Annual Lunch, where we get all of our seniors together for like our typical comfort food menus. Usually these are separated into smaller groups, and they attend on a rotational basis on a monthly basis. And like I say, we usually make some sort of fish. We make kabocha, daikon, kimpira, things that they wouldn't normally eat nowadays because you're at home, they don't cook, or they're in a home. But once a year, we bring the whole group together. There's about 90 in this picture. And we get the some entertainment, such as the tatsumi dancers, and give them a kind of an enjoyable afternoon. And we're hoping to reinstitute this in the near future. I think April, we're going to start these up again, and now that COVID rules have relaxed. But it was during these luncheons that the children of these seniors would come to pick their parents up, and they would smell the odors coming from the kitchen. And they would comment that, wow, that brings back so many memories, and can we have the recipes for that? And I guess that's what triggered our idea to create this cookbook, that we felt that unless somebody preserved and wrote down these recipes, they would soon be lost. And that was the genesis really for this cookbook. Sadly, over this last 2 years, we've lost many of these seniors, and it's, I guess, a fact of life that soon, as this generation ages, we'll slowly lose them all, and we then become the next group to come to bat. Next slide. As I said earlier, we partnered with Tonari Gumi, and here's a picture of their staff and volunteers. And we've worked with them on a variety of other programs, including our early onset dementia program, Iki Iki, our brain exercise program, Genki. And most recently, we've applied for some joint funding through the BC Redress Funds for the Japanese Health and Wellness Fund. Next slide. These are the two other books I mentioned. Home Away from Home is the first book produced by Tonari Gumi. And they just ordered their 5th printing of that book. Our Edible Roots is our more recent book. And that really talks about how to source seeds and grow the plants, as well as has a number of recipes in that book. So if you're a gardener and wish to grow your own Japanese vegetables, that's the book to obtain. And I think the 3 books are combined as a special gift package if you want to purchase them 3 at a time from Nikkei Place Bookstore. Next slide. And here is my wife cooking our famous chow mein, and she does that on a stool because she's not high enough to stir the chow mein. This chow mein is cooked at our annual July 1st Steveston Salmon Festival, and we've been doing that since the early 70s, with all proceeds going to programming at the Steveston Community Center. As I mentioned in the other slides, we've maintained a relationship with the Community Society, and I think there's been 4 Japanese Canadians as president, I being one of them, and the current president is Ellen Sakai. Jim Kojima and Mr. Mizuguchi were the other 2 presidents of the society. And they've been very supportive of all the projects and that we've undertaken over the years. Next slide. I wanted to show you just one of our typical locally sourced recipes, and this is herring. And this is one of the only fresh fish that you may be able to get during the wintertime. If you can switch to this next slide. In the cookbook, we include salted herring sushi, herring sigoshi, which is raw herring, and herring and soy sauce. Now we put this herring sigoshi, raw herring, because my father-in-law used to make this, and I wouldn't eat it myself, but he would mince up the raw herring and put the vinegar on top. And I think vinegar would kind of have like, would semi-cook the raw herring, and I hopefully killed any parasites. And he used to enjoy it quite gustily, and I thought, it was not something to my taste. But again, because I talk in the book about not having freezers, you had to find ways to preserve fish, and a lot of times it was through salting or other ways of preservation, because freezers, home freezers at that time weren't readily available. We used to store our fish over the winter time at a frozen food locker plant, and if you talk to children today, they wouldn't even know what you're talking about. But it was like going to the bank and withdrawing a salmon once a week, so that you would have something to eat. Again, because we were poor, I don't remember eating a lot of meat, store-bought meat. It was mostly stuff that your father would catch. Next slide. And this is the book. And as I mentioned, we ordered 2,000 copies. We were able to use some of the funds provided to us from the New Horizons grant to purchase this book. And we split the proceeds between Tonadagumi and ourselves. And my share was 800 books. But it's interesting, the printer, you would think that like on your computer, he would be able to plug in 2,000 copies and the printing would stop at 2,000 copies, but there's an overrun. There's actually has to be a physical effort to stop the print. And usually several hundred books get printed in addition to your order. So I think we ended up getting between 2,400 to 2,500 books. So my share was 800 books and I sold out in 3 weeks. I think the rest of the books were, I think they just finished selling their last books. And we partnered with 2 retailers. Tonadagumi sold out of their bookstore, but they also allowed Nikkei Place to sell from their bookstore and also handle our mail orders. And in Richmond, the Gulf of Georgia National Historic Cannery Site were our retailers. And I wanted to share the proceeds with other organizations that share the similar philosophy to what we're trying to do in the community. And I was very happy to see that they were able to receive funds from the proceeds of these books. Next slide. And as a bonus, as I did in the other thing, I've included our chow mein recipe, so you can download this or copy this at your leisure. And this is different than from what you might read about the Cumberland chow mein. It's got different ingredients. And my mother would have, who was born in Mission, would create their chow mein a little bit differently too. She would use chow mein in her recipe rather than say celery. And this speaks to, again, one of the features of the cookbook in that it features Asian fusion recipes. So we have chow mein, we have pak kui, which is basically sweet and sour spare ribs. We have egg foo yang. And these are things that we kind of stole from the Chinese neighbors and became almost staples within our own Japanese cuisine. I want to conclude by really reflecting on how fortunate and pleased we are with the success of the book and how well it's been received in the community. Selling out, I thought, for the rest of my life, I'd be selling books. Tonadagumi decided to order a second printing of 1,000 books. And I said, good luck, but I don't want to be selling any more books, and whatever proceeds they make from the book is theirs. And I'm happy that they can generate some more revenue from it. More importantly, the feedback we've received from everybody about a simple cookbook has really seemed to have struck a chord, whether it's your time in COVID, being quarantined in your home or what, but we've received a lot of really wonderful feedback from the community about how they appreciate somebody putting together these recipes and preserving them. But I think the compliment that I appreciate the most is somebody emailed me, and at the end of it, she mentioned that this tastes like memories when she made these recipes. Another person said that she has cooked every recipe. She's going to cook every recipe of the book, and she is halfway through. So she's cooked 30 something recipes, and she has no complaints about any of the recipes or how we wrote them and how they she could follow. You know, they were simple to follow, and they ended up. And I think Lorena will attest to that. She made one. She said yesterday, and I'll let her talk to about it yesterday. But like I say, those I think were the highest compliments we received, and they were very much appreciated. Anyways, that's my long-winded presentation, and I hope you guys have all enjoyed that. And if you haven't bought the book yet, the second printing will be coming out, I think, in May, and so they'll be available again. So if anybody has any questions or comments, I don't know, sure. I don't want to waste up too much of my time.
Oh, we've got plenty of time. Sorry, or do you have more slides here? I'm just
That's it, I think.
looking through. That's it? Okay. Didn't want to cut short your excellent slideshow. Thank you so much, Kelvin. It was so interesting. But one of the things that I really relate to is about the whole family, culture, community, recipes, food, memories. And so one of the first things I had said to Kelvin is that it's my family too. My Oikawa side of the family on Oikawa Island was part of the fishing community, Steveston fishing community. And unfortunately, I didn't have any of my family that passed away. So I didn't have that connection. So I didn't even have the connection to the actual food. But true on my mom's side, I didn't learn as much because I just, Obacha and grandma's going to live forever and she's just going to keep cooking for me. So I didn't pay that much attention. And then when I finally thought to ask my mom, it was that, well, you just add a little bit of this and I can't work with that. I don't know what that means, right? Because I don't have that experience or background. So I was so happy for this cookbook. And so last night, I meant to do it earlier, but I've just been busy day and night. But last night I tried the simmered daikon and age. And then I decided to be very adventurous. So I shot a little bit of a video there, and I will pop the YouTube link in the chat if you want to take a look. But I have to say, it was very easy to follow. I was able to follow the instructions. Nowadays with grocery stores, they have more Asian vegetables. So actually I found daikon in my local Safeway. Age I did get from the local Japanese grocery store, but it was very easy to follow. And then it was so delicious. I think you'll see on the video, I just couldn't stop gushing over the taste, the smell and the taste. It brought back so many memories. And because my grandmother on my mom's side had cooked a similar thing with the daikon, and it was delicious. So the recipe works, which is the best. So let's just go to the chat. If anybody, I'm by myself here, so if you want to help me out, if you have a question, if you could use the raise the hand function, that would be excellent. That's on the bottom of your screen. If you put your cursor, you can click on your hand and then I will see you right away. Otherwise, I will scroll through. Just gonna check for questions. Oh, glad you got in, Lily. Thank you. Canadian Chinese food, right? Linda, love the book, Kelvin, such good memories. Oh, she bought the book as a gift, so you need to get one for yourself. Rogie, welcome. Rogie from San Francisco, California. He says he remembers visiting Steveston in 2005 during Kopani. And the fishing community reminds him of his uncle, who was part of the San Pedro, which is near Los Angeles, that fishing community, and Terminal Island near Long Beach in California is another fishing community. Debbie says, great presentation. Thanks, Kelvin. Karen says, I'm a Yonsei, brings back beautiful memories of her grandmother. Koyanagi, and Auntie's cooking a beautiful dinner for family gatherings. And she's honoring them by learning to cook their Japanese dishes. Oh, Linda has a question. Kelvin, wondering where the second last slide of your Steveston, the memorial, the one with the two huge rocks, the triangle rock, that's near the tram station in Steveston.
Yeah, it's right at the corner of number 1 and Moncton.
Did you get that, Linda? Corner number 1 in Moncton in Steveston. You should go see it. It's really amazing. You have to go up close to the rocks because one big rock, it has the sort of metal insert of where the camps were. So you can see all the camps outlined in the rock. Joanne says, congratulations on the book. Great presentation. Where can we buy the book? I'm in Toronto.
You can order it through Nikkei Place.
Can do it order, and I'm not sure if any of the booksellers, there was one Japanese Canadian bookseller. I'd have to check, but we can get that information for you. Rogie asks, how many active fishing families are left in Steveston?
Oh, I would think there's 3 persons left.
And Debbie says, where is the Wisteria Place? Where is it?
It's on Gary Street, just behind the Steveston Buddhist Temple.
Thank you. Linda saying yes, inscriptions there. Oh, the rocks. Vivian, hi Vivian. Thank you, Kelvin, for the wonderful reminders of family comfort foods. Joanne asked about the Steveston Salmon Festival for July 1st. Is that going on?
It's going to go on, but part of it will be virtual. Some will be, we're trying to limit the crowds because normally we could have between 80 to 100,000 people show up. So I'm the chair of the Japanese Cultural Show, and we've kind of limited what we're going to host this year. Because of that, we're just going to use the martial arts building this year rather than the martial arts and the Japanese Cultural Center. A lot of the seniors are still a little bit leery about having lots of public around, and being a senior myself, I'm a little bit leery too. So we're trying to do things so that we kind of limit the numbers. But yes, it will go on this year.
Yes, and Joanne, you're visiting, so definitely check it out. And also you can see some of the sites that Kelvin has the pictures of. Thank you, Anne. As I mentioned, I'm sort of by myself trying to do everything here text. So she put in the link for nikkeiplace.org, and you can click right on this link here. You can buy it online. Thank you, Anne. Debbie's posted too, the bundle. Debbie's posted the bundle that Kelvin mentioned. Janice says, looking forward to getting the book. Chow Min has special Salmon Festival memories of her family. Kelvin and Kay are a Steveston treasure. I would agree. And that's why I didn't do a big introduction for Kelvin, because there's so much more I could say. I could take the whole hour. So thank you, Kelvin, because it's him and the team there in Steveston, all the volunteers, they have done some amazing work in Steveston. So there's a lot to see there, the projects. And then when you're in Steveston as well, it's actually the first example of public health care, because the Japanese Canadian fishers built that hospital, but it wasn't just for Japanese Canadians. It was open to everyone. And in fact, one of the current counselors, his father, City of Richmond counselors, Harold Steves, his father was the first white person to be born in that hospital. So it's the first example of public health care. And thank you to the Japanese Canadian fishers who decided that, they needed healthcare for the fishers and their families. And so they did that initiative. And anyway, the building has been moved to I guess you call it downtown Steveston, right next to the museum. So you can see it there, and it's got different
one of the
exhibits.
buildings, right?
Or one of the buildings, but yeah, so you can see it there, and they've got it. And I just went through there, can't even remember now, earlier this year, and they've got displays there. So some of the artifacts, I remember seeing an old cloth rice bag and some of the fishing tools, etc. So they've got that, and then also there's a picture of my family pride, my Uncle Buck Suzuki. There was a picture, I saw that. And then
that whole exhibit is going to be refreshed. It's been there 10 years, and so we'll be working on with the city of Richmond to refresh that.
Oh, great. Anyway, it's all I'm saying is it's you need to see it. It's great. So it has some of those archival pictures, and it shows you the community as it started. Vivian asks, is there a website or email for Steveston's Japanese Canadian events? So the bazaars, etc. Is there a list?
Not really. You have to go to the individual organizations' websites to see that. One of the things I've been contemplating is doing a virtual walking tour. to feature all these.
Oh,
Like a lot of this stuff is still in existence.
right.
And a lot of the things that I talk about were firsts. I didn't mention Gihei Kuno, who was the first Japanese Canadian teacher at Lord Byng. And one of the things I'm trying to do is to have the Lord Byng School renamed Gihei
Yes.
Kuno Shimizu Elementary. And so we'll see how we're successful. I'm not sure the school board is on board yet, but because it's the 80th anniversary of the internment of the Japanese, I thought maybe it's about time that at least we raise awareness of this. There's also a mural being installed on Lord Byng School, and we'll have the theme of discrimination and integration, I think. I forget. Anyways, we're going to take the school children through a process with the artists, and I'll be presenting to the grade 6, 7 school children in 2 weeks. And from some of the ideas of the history that I provide, they will then come up with ideas, what they interpret from that. Then the artist will then gather those ideas and develop the mural, which will be placed on the west wall of the school.
Awesome. Great. Oh, and I see Derek has your hand up. Derek, hi, Derek. Do you have a question?
Yes. I haven't picked up the book yet, but I was wondering, having grown up in Greenwood, my dad used to love dogfish. We would have stew. I was wondering if that stew was popular amongst others and how to make it. I guess I could ask my mom. She's 93, still living and cooking on her own. But
Derek, I did put in there a recipe that I recall from my dad, and we called it fish head soup. And I remember my father, whenever we got a lingcod, would take the gills out and then just throw it in a pot of water with some onions and some miso, and just stew it until the meat fell off. And he also used to always love the eyeballs, which would always gross me out.
oh, my dad too.
Yeah, but no, we didn't put any stews or things like that. And it's not dog fish, it's dog salmon they would have used.
Oh, okay.
It was more of a coarse fish, it wasn't considered that great. In fact, in the early years, they would kind of throw it away. And then
Right, it was
the early entrepreneurs,
food, right?
they started salting the dog salmon and sending it to Japan. And it could be, people made a fortune out of that. And that's something we look forward to, especially the roll. We think the roll from dog salmon is the best. And also for making kamaboko. A lot of people will say dog salmon is the best for kamaboko.
And there is a fish cake recipe.
Fish cake recipe, yes.
I'm going to be making every recipe in this cookbook. So it's the fish cake one, the one that's the deep fried, so it's brown on the outside and has gobo in it. Yeah. So I remember that my grandmother made that actually.
But it's interesting that some of the recipes, I'm sure, originated from certain prefectures, because there was one recipe that my father-in-law, who was from Wakayama Prefecture, he would slice the nose of a spring salmon, and it's basically cartilage, and he would slice it very thinly and pickle it. And there's a Japanese name for it. But other people within that community had it too. And my father remember having it as a youngster. And so I'm sure it's something from Wakayama Prefecture that, because down in Kagoshima, we never had something like that. Or okai-san,
right.
We never had, like rice gruel soup. And whereas we had ochazuke.
No, and that's really true, because when you were mentioning about the Cumberland, my mom's side is my mom's side is from Cumberland. So when you were mentioning chow mein, so but I never knew it was Cumberland chow mein. I just knew it's Obachan's chow mein, right?
Yeah, they called it Cumberland chow mein apparently. But like I mentioned, food is a great connector, and I talk about the wonton soup, and as soon as I mentioned that, I think about the Japanese language school bazaars. But the one that really struck home was I found T&T Supermarket, the Chinese supermarket. They were selling periwinkles. So I thought, wow, so I brought it home, and we just cooked it up in a little bit of salted water. We spread out newspapers and got our little needles out, and you expertly withdrew the meat from the shell. And it brought so many memories of being at the cannery house when my dad would come back from nori tori or whatever, and have a bucket of periwinkles. And we cook it up fresh, and we just have it like almost like hors d'oeuvres. And today, people would probably balk at eating something like that.
I actually have to admit, I've never had periwinkles. We did crab. My mom
Yeah.
would cook fresh crab and then newspapers on the table, and then we would be eating crab. I'm
Yeah.
going to have to try periwinkles.
Yeah, try
So
the
let me
periwinkle.
get back to the chat here. I know there's a few comments. Roji, plenty of commercial fishing families working hard in Hawaii. Stacy Hayashi was working on a film about their current struggles to keep their livelihood alive. Environmental regulations are shrinking where and what they can fish. Life is getting hard. Yes, definitely. Mayumi, she's heard there's a Steveston reunion this year, question mark?
As part of the BC Redress Health and Wellness Fund that was announced, every community applied for funding, and the Steveston Buddhist Temple and the Steveston Community Society made a joint presentation to increase our funding. And on September 10th, we will be hosting a reunion for senior survivors. And we're wanting people to have residency in Richmond for at least 25 years. But we're trying to collect all the names regardless of whether you meet the residency requirement. And we only put that in there because we think we would have too many people wanting to come, because we think there's about 800 senior survivors in Richmond, and we can only house maybe 400 max. Again, not knowing what the COVID rules are in September. We were going to have this in June, but moved it back to give us a bit more time to organize because we had to find all the names. So far, we have about 250 names of people, and you have to have survived the injustice between 1942 and April 1st, 1949. And so trying to find those names, and now we have to find the addresses. So we'll be going out to the community pretty soon to ask for their help in finding these addresses for us.
Okay.
The other thing that I get involved with is the National Day of Mourning service, and we'll be announcing that soon. But it's a service we hold at the Fisherman's Memorial at Gary Point. And there's a lot of Japanese names on the memorial, and a lot of the Japanese families come and lay flowers at the wreath, and that's held every year on April 28th.
Oh, I didn't even know that. I've gone to the ones with the BC Federation of Labor and so forth, and they're usually held in Vancouver or they go between the different labor councils, sometimes in New Westminster. Or
Ours is only recognizing the fishermen.
Yes, no, but that's important because that day is talking about remembering, but also working to make workplaces safe for all workers. So I'm glad that the fishers are recognized.
Mm-hmm. And like I say, there's a lot of Japanese names on that memorial, and I think it's fitting that the Japanese community have a presence there.
Yes, definitely. That's one thing. We need more visibility for our stories and to make sure we have a presence. Roji has a question. Was there any communication between Canadian and American Nikkei fishing communities in the past?
I don't think so. I'm not, I don't know everything, but I can't recollect any official connection between the communities. I know we've had people come here just on show of interest, to find out more about the fishing. I know there's people here from Japan that come through regularly, but not anything between the Americans and the Canadians. Now I noticed that somebody was here from California.
That's Roji.
Yeah, and I know that my friend's mother actually came from that area. She's a Yokota.
Yeah, another time I'll share a big story, but just to say, on my mom's side, it was brothers that came from Hiroshima in the 1800s. And I have a whole bunch of Japanese American family because two of the brothers came up to Cumberland and the one stayed in the US. So I have Japanese American relatives all the way through to Washington, New York, and in Georgia. And some of them were part of the 442nd. So another big story of our connections between Japanese Americans and Japanese Canadians. Mayumi just says, Tonari Gumi, she thinks has a few copies left, but they don't do mail order. Thanks, Debbie. Debbie's popping up with comments. Linda says she misses Fisherman's Bologna. which you used to buy at Joe's grocery store, #1 in Moncton. I never had it, so, but there is a recipe in the book.
It's a big 5 or 6 inch round bologna. And the owner, and I mentioned this in the book, when I was talking to her, Irene Shiho, she used to call that Japanese bologna because it was only the Japanese that bought it.
Oh, okay. But you've got there's a recipe in there with cabbage and bologna, I think, in the cookbook. So
and you remember, all these recipes can be modified and adjusted. It's not, that you have to follow exactly these recipes. They're meant to, because first of all, there's a lot of salt in these recipes, only because there's, lack of refrigeration back in those days. When we were on the boats, we loved bologna because it kept well. We loved cabbage because it kept well without refrigeration. You'd kind of leave it in an area just above the hold of the boat. And hopefully it was a little bit cooler down there than, say, in the rest of the cabin.
Okay, lots of comments. Linda, periwinkles are so good. I'm gonna have to try it. I've never had it. Debbie says her husband grew up with periwinkles in New Brunswick. And she's also got some links about Cumberland. Oh, Joanne asks, does the cookbook have any dessert recipes?
We didn't do many dessert recipes because Home Away from Home had quite a few in there. And we're trying not to duplicate too many of the recipes. We did a couple of recipes because, we felt they had a bit of Steveston twist to them.
Mm-hmm.
But for the most part, manju and those kind of things are basically standard type recipes. So you can find those in the Home Away from Home recipe book.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, and there's links in the chat there, so you can buy the bundle of books. I've got all 3 books. I've used from all 3, and I can testify that the recipes are good. They work. There's
One of the things I thought, Lorena, was that maybe we could have a depository on, say, your website where people can put in a recipe and share recipes.
Actually, that would be good because, as I mentioned, now that I don't have any connection, I don't have my grandparents or parents to ask anything. I'm lacking the recipes. So I've been eagerly collecting all these cookbooks and tasting and so forth. But I've also had very helpful people who have given me different recipes or tips. But that would be wonderful to have. That's what I was thinking too, because I run into so many of the older generation that will say, well, you just have to taste and you put a little bit, and I can't work with little bit. I don't know what that means.
Once the COVID restrictions are further relaxed, we hope to have person-to-person cooking lessons.
Mm-hmm.
And the first one I'm hoping to do is to have a friend of mine teach how to make manju. So keep in touch with me. And if you're interested in doing these classes, we will be. I don't widely advertise them because as soon as the word gets out, it's full.
Yes.
And I don't want to be like the community center and forever be organizing classes. So.
Oh, well, I think my hand will be up. I want to learn.
We have a couple of people, and now that the book is out, they seem to be more willing to participate. Normally, the Japanese don't like to, they say nail the sticks up. They don't want to be known as the best. And so they'll say, no, go see so-and-so, she's best. So you go see her, and you go right around until you get back to the first person again. We all know who the best is, but they just don't, because of the Japanese persona, they don't admit it.
I know.
That's one of the barriers.
I know. I'm running into that right now because the NAJC wants to collect stories. Oh, I'll put a plug out for this. Collecting stories of your families, because it is the 80th anniversary of 1942, the start of the whole internment incarceration. It's also the 75th anniversary of the founding of the National Association of Japanese Canadians. So we're looking for stories, and it can be stories about your family. It could be about food, about something you remember, about your grandmother cooking, for example. But I find a lot of times our Japanese Canadian community is so reticent. I'll go to someone, they'll say, oh, I'm not important. I don't have anything to, no, just share your family story. So if you have any family stories, if you could please send it to national@najc.ca. And also we're looking for some pictures. Connie Kadota, some of you may know from the Japanese Canadian community here, shared a bit of her family story, and her father Charles Cadota and her uncle Gordon, who was a past president of NAJC and helped to shape the Canadian Charter of Human Rights. And so, yeah, but it doesn't have to be big stories. We're looking for the little stories too, but what it was like, and maybe a different perspective, like people that were children had a different experience during the internment because they were pretty much protected by their parents. So definitely want that. We still have, I made the session a little bit longer just so we're not rushed. So if anybody else wants to share some stories, one of the things I'll share is the Oikawa Journal. I don't speak Japanese, but it was translated into English. And so my mom's side came in the 1800s, but my dad's side came in 1906 on the Suian Maru. And I always remember it's 1906 because it was 1 year before the anti-Asian riots in Vancouver. And the description of the Fraser River, they said there was so many salmon, so much fish, you could, I don't know if they literally, but you could walk on the backs of the fish. The river was that full. And they said that the white fishers didn't like the dog salmon, so it was like a throwaway. And of course, they didn't know about the delicacy, the roe. So to them, it was all garbage. And so the Japanese Canadian fishers were able to export that and send that back to Japan. But it just, like when I see the Fraser River now, I'm trying to picture that there were that many fish. And the one thing I miss of my memory when I was a child was when the Japanese Canadian fishers would come back from fishing, and every once in a while we get the spring salmon. Has anyone tasted spring salmon? My mom would pan fry it. It was so luscious and delicious. That's burned in my memory, and I want that taste again. It is just, does anyone remember that spring salmon?
Yeah, if you look in the book, there's one recipe called jibu, and you always use the first spring salmon caught at the first opening because it had the highest fat content. And so that's one of our favorite recipes.
Yes, that recipe is in there. Linda says, yes, white spring salmon is the best. Anyone else want to share any of their family food recipes? Oh, Roji asks about seaweed. Was there any seaweed harvesting business in Steveston?
Not commercially, but there were individuals that, and I think there's still a couple of guys that go out and harvest seaweed. My brother-in-law goes out to Saka Brothers because their father still, does seaweed, but he gives it all away. And I forget how many racks they made. I think they made 70 racks.
Wow.
And I think he gets 8 sheets out of every rack. So 8 times 70, that's how many sheets he got.
Oh, Linda says her father would do that, harvest seaweed, and she remembers those drying racks. Oh, yes, I forgot to mention the session is being recorded because we know sometimes people just have, life, other events and aren't able to attend. So we will have we'll post this on the najc.ca website. You're welcome. And that's the other thing is why I'm like a little kid. I'm just jumping on all your stories and memories, because the other thing I didn't know about is my grandmother in Cumberland. She taught people, she harvested seaweed, but I never saw that. That was all before my time. Oh, Debbie has a question. So internees, so those that were incarcerated from 1942, she's asking about what did they eat and how those from the coast must have missed their fish and seafood.
My father-in-law mentioned he was an angler, prisoner of war camp, and he remembers, being fed the Caucasian food, and they would feed the same thing cycled, every other week. And he remembers mac and cheese being served, and a lot of the Japanese didn't like it for some reason, whether it was a cheese or what. But my dad, being Mikey, would eat anything, and so he would take not his share, but any of those shares that others didn't want. And so he came out of internment camp or the POW camp quite healthy. But yes, they did miss. They weren't given any of that Japanese food during those days, and But an interesting story. When I went to Alberta to visit my aunt's relatives, this is the adaptation of recipes to what's available. So their sashimi was from trout. They would catch trout and serve trout sashimi. And I think Manzanar, there's a story about people sneaking out of the camp and fishing for trout in the States. But in Alberta, because they didn't have salmon, they would use whatever fish products they had to make sashimi and other Japanese type foods.
I see Roshi is nodding. So Manzanar, I think that's true, Roshi. And also Roshi saying that there was I guess the seaweed. There's a pretty strong business in Monterey Bay. They dried and processed the seaweed in Salinas in California and then sold them to Japanese stores. Thanks, Roshi. Vivian. Oh, pickles. Yes. She loves the pickles her mom made. It was sliced Japanese cucumbers and salt, and she put a plate on top and then a rock for weight for a few days. So she's asking, is that correct? My grandmother made it, and I remember, well, she did it a different way. My grandmother had, I think it's bran mash, because in Slocan, where I'd go visit my grandma, there's a root cellar, which was always kind of this dark place that I was always a little bit intimidated about going in. And she had this tub, and it had this mushy looking, she'd pull out a cucumber and then she'd take it back to the kitchen, wash it off, and then slice it. And it was so good. But I do remember she did, I think it was more like cabbage, and it was weighted down and there was a big brick or rock or something on top. Joanne.
We made a quick cabbage tsukemono recipe in the book.
Yes.
That you can refer to.
Yeah, so there's a recipe in that. And then, let me catch up here. Linda says, yes, cucumber, also daikon, pickles. And then, Debbie says she read about some that were interned that use curling rocks at the internment camp to make pickled vegetables. Joanne says, yes, Nuka pickles. So in Toronto, she says they're trying to, my mouse just kind of jumped on me. Let me get back where I was. Joanne says that in Toronto, they're trying to videotape some cooking lessons so that that consistency is often important. Good idea. Linda says, yes, salt, and also use the bran mash. Thank you. Derek says, yes, nukazuke with the plate and the rock. Okay, so yes, that is a thing. I haven't tried that technique myself. I actually tried miso. I tried cucumbers in miso. I had some Japanese cucumbers. I tried that last year before. I think you can find me on social media. I posted some of the pictures, and I did daikon too. And then I tried vinegar, but then I realized I was kind of guessing on the proportions. I didn't have the proportions right on the vinegar because it was too vinegary, but I was experimenting. But that could be a whole show in itself about pickles, because yes, Japanese pickles are amazing. Hang on, missing. When you make comment, it's great to hear your comments, see your comments. But it keeps jumping up here. Roji, oh yes. His Obachan from Fukushima made her own pickles. She made her own Nikkei, the fermented rice bran, to pickle cucumber, eggplant, napa cabbage, even watermelon rind. Actually, I heard about that. I've never tried that. She also made her own natto, beer, and sake. And another one, Kelvin book's really interesting. It's been read, reread, mouth-watering recipes. Thanks for session. Missed most of this. Oh, it's Kathy Turnbull in Edmonton. Thank you. Oh, yes. The umeboshi, pickled plum with the shiso leaves. When I wasn't feeling well, my grandma would put a cup of hot water and she'd put an umeboshi, and then she'd tell me to drink it and then I'd eat it. And at first it was a little bit sour, but I must admit it made me feel better. So I buy the from the Japanese grocery store. I buy that and I keep that on hand in my fridge. And then if I'm feeling a little under weather, I get a cup of hot water and I put the umeboshi in there. It feels like my grandmother's with me. It's like a warm hug.
We actually planted 2 ume trees at our Nikkei memorial site.
Oh,
And they were donated by 2 Japanese gardeners because you had to import ume trees from California. They weren't readily available here.
Does it take a few, like, do you get fruit? Do you have to wait a few years before fruit comes, or?
Last year was the first year we got fruit, and the ume trees will blossom earlier than other plum or matsuda trees.
Oh, wow. So I'm
They're the first to
sensing,
blossom.
did you try something with the ume
Oh,
recipes?
I think there's only 1 or 2 that were, they were quite small.
Oh,
And so,
okay.
I'm just letting it grow a bit bigger, but that was planted because of the connection of Steveston to Wakayama, and Wakayama Prefecture is the largest producer in Japan of ume.
I didn't know that.
So we had all these significant things, like the big rocks you saw are actually from back east. And it's to symbolize how far the Japanese were sent, but yet returned to things. So we shipped those tonnage of rocks, but I think they came from a Quebec quarry that our architect found. And they were shipped out here. And you should have seen the big transport truck that brought those rocks to our site. They were like, I think the largest one was 8 tons.
Wow. Amazing. But I love that connection, because that's the one thing, like, this is home, the original home for Japanese Canadians. So,
Exactly.
and so when I mentioned the story, I mentioned about the exile. Some were able to return, some weren't able to return. Well, like my mom's side, they were in Bay Farm pop-off camps. And I remember my grandfather, when I would visit him, he'd always say, "I'm Canadian. I was born in Cumberland." And I'd say to my mom, because I'm just a little kid, and I'd say to my mom, "Why does grandpa keep saying he's born in Canada?" So, and I didn't, because I didn't know the story. I didn't know what happened to them. And as an adult now I realize, and at some point with the Canadian government telling people, well, go out east or go back to Japan. So apparently the government official told my grandfather, go back to Japan. And my grandfather said, "I was born here. This is my country. I'm not leaving." So they stayed. That's why they stayed in Slocan, and I would go visit him. But yeah, it's interesting, the different connections, the family connections, and always important to remember our families and their stories. So I'm just going to catch up with some of the chats here. Roji says, "Oh, his family farm was in western Nebraska. Yes, used umeboshi as medicine. So grandma made shishmaki, the family dirt cellars, like what I described, to get natto to ferment. She used utampo, a Japanese hot water bottle wrapped in a futon to generate heat." Wow. Oh, and then Linda says you can make the Fuji ume with Italian prune plums and then wrap in the purple shiso leaves. I've heard that. I think that was one of the, I can't remember now, one of the fundraiser bazaars I went to, and I was talking to one of the Japanese Canadian women, and she said that they picked all these Italian plums and did a big pickling party. And that's how they made their umeboshi, the jars and jars. Or maybe it's not umeboshi, maybe it's Fuji ume. Oh, Linda, I should get lessons from you. Sounds like Linda's got a lot of background in making this. I've never made it. I've just eaten it. I'm a big fan. I eat a lot of food and I post a lot of pictures of my food. Mary, I know you're online. I don't know if you want to share some stories. Mary Kitagawa, she was also, my family was in, oh, Linda grows shiso? Oh, wow, nice. I don't know, Mary, if you, not to put you on the spot or anything, but Mary also she shared her stories. So my father's side went directly to Caslo because they were on Oikawa Island. They were here. My mom's side, being in Cumberland, got shipped to Hastings Park, which we won't talk about the food. It was horrible. The government bragged about it only cost them pennies to pay for the food. Well, no wonder, because people were getting sick. It was such poor quality, horrible food that they were served. But Mary was also can speak to Hastings Park about the conditions there, and then in the camps, what families had to do to survive.
Hi, Lorraine.
Hi, Mary.
And Kelvin, the stories you're telling is just out of this world. I learned so much. And anyway, I'm so grateful that you've done this.
Well, thank you, Mary.
There are, parts of my stories that are missing, and then you just filled them in. My mom was the first Japanese Canadian baby born in Steveston. Her name
Oh.
was Kimiko Murakami.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, and anyway, that's the story she told me.
Is she
And
related, Mary, is she
yeah.
related to the Murakami family, or Otokichi family?
no.
It's a different Murakami, okay.
But there is a link, and I can't tell that story right now. But
Okay.
it's very interesting. I told the story to Bucko and Linda because there's a connection there. But anyway, the recipes that you guys are talking about right now, my mom made a lot of them, and she was a wonderful cook. Debbie's got something here. My mother was an Okano. And she married my dad, who came from Hiroshima. His name was Katsuyori Murakami. So anyway, there's so many things I'd like to talk to you about, Kelvin.
We'll have to get together.
That
Yes.
would be wonderful. I would like to do that. Yes.
Great.
Well, anyway, but you're such a busy man. I don't know if you could squeeze my visit. And so,
Mary, there's always time for you.
oh, thank you. Thank
Yes.
you.
We need to get, as things are getting safer and opening up, we need to reestablish those connections and make new connections and get together. And that's one thing I definitely, NAJC, we did a lot of online sessions, but I really miss the in-person events. And then I could, afterwards chat with people and walk up to people and say, hi, oh, I haven't seen you for long. And I miss that. So we're going to do more of that and get together. So appreciate all of you that are attending today and your comments. Roji just added about, Nebraska. So interesting tip. So interesting fact, his family wasn't relocated because Japanese Americans were sent generally to those big camps. But because they were already sort of away from the West Coast in Nebraska, they weren't relocated. European neighbors stood up for the family. So it was all United immigrants who were seeking a better life. Obachan learned to cook German, Russian, Swedish food. She didn't speak any English, but she learned by observation. The closest Japanese food store was in Denver, Colorado. Wow, a 10-hour drive. Obachan also made her own miso, and same resourcefulness. And that's true, because that was one of the things with my grandmother. I never really paid that much attention. I'd eat all this great food, but now I think back, she made her own fish cake, not only the fried one, but the white one on the board with a little bit of pink. She made all of that. She made her own tofu, age. She made her own age, like she made her own mochi, manju, everything from scratch. I'm just so amazed and so grateful to all our the female Japanese Canadians, the mothers, the grandmothers, aunties, everyone. Karen says, thanks for the session. Lots of good family memories. She said, gochi so sama was said before leaving the dinner table. I always remember itadakimasu right before eating. Thanks, Debbie. Vivian. Thank you, Kelvin, Lorraine. Yes, Vivian is a Richmond resident. So acknowledge that. Thank you. Thank you so much. We're coming up to 12:30, which I promised was the end. Does anyone have any? I don't want to cut anyone off. Anyone have any last minute comments or anything you wanted to share? I enjoyed this session. Would people be interested in maybe doing another session? Let me know, or you can also, oh, got thumbs up. There we go. Yes, big yes. Okay, so we'll be planning some more food sessions. And yeah, stay tuned, join up. I love this. This is so fantastic. We need to do more of this and share our stories and share our love of food and their connection to culture. As I said, the National Association of Japanese Canadians, the National Japanese Canadian Organization, is committed to working on the remembrance of the stories and moving forward, and also ensuring human rights for all and making sure that we have an inclusive, thriving, diverse communities everywhere. And the stories of Japanese Canadians are important, not only because it is the history, it's a history of Canada, history of the US, it's a history and must be made visible and must be shared, and also has important lessons, because how many times we've seen different, I'll call horrible deja vu of other groups of people being attacked or slammed or stereotyped based on their race, based on their religion. And that was something that happened to Japanese Canadians who were accused of being spies, etc. And no one was ever charged. There were lots of rumors. There was lots of people, including politicians, that were part of the fear mongering and spread those horrible rumors. Internment, incarceration was a racist act. There was nothing to do with national security. And even the head of the Canadian police, the RCMP, and the Canadian military, in secret documents, told the government there's no evidence, there's no need to take action. The government did not listen. So let us not forget that, and let us remind people it was a racist act and should never happen again to any other group of people. So thank you so much. If you have any other questions or have any other ideas about future online sessions, if you have stories to share, please, you can, whoops, let me put it, I was going to do that. Sorry, let me quickly do that. national@najc.ca. You can email, and then also the recording and other information is at the website, which is najc.ca. Thank you so much for attending. Enjoy the rest of your Saturday, and a very special. Oh,
Lorraine, can I just say something? I'll see you in Cloverdale on next Thursday. So maybe you could, mention something.
oh, yes, that's
That'd be-
true. Before
yeah.
I do that, though, I just want to say a special thank you to Kelvin, not only for being our special guest and putting so much effort into doing your slideshows and sharing the history in the Steveston community and producing this awesome cookbook, which I am going to cook every recipe. I'm going to try every recipe, and all the other work. And this is just the tip of the iceberg of what he's shown you. He's done so much more that can't even be included today. So thank you for all the work that you're doing, you continue to do, and thank you for being our special guest, Kelvin.
Thank you.
Round of applause for Kelvin. Thank you, Kelvin. Awesome. There are a lot of different things involved. What Mary's saying is on March 31st, for those that are local or will be in the Surrey Metro Vancouver area, the Museum of Surrey is in Cloverdale. And they have the traveling exhibit, Broken Promises. And this is an exhibit that was the Nikkei National Museum, the Royal BC Museum, Landscapes of Injustice project was involved with, put together. And this is the story, the piece of the story of Japanese Canadians and the dispossession. And this exhibit is quite amazing because it tells a story from the perspective of 7 families. And they chose 7 families based on sort of the background of one's farming, one's a fisher. And then it's really great for families too, because the different panels is family friendly. There's in the panels. So the fisher family, I think, is a little fishing boat icon. So you can follow all the exhibits and panels and so forth. Mary Kitagawa actually is one of the family stories, Salt Spring Island, the farming, and I think her icon is strawberry. So you can follow the different exhibits. So the traveling exhibit is there until next month at Surrey, and we hope more museums across Canada. And next Thursday, they postponed the in-person event. So it's postponed to Thursday at, oh, correct me, Mary, is it 6:30 or 6 o'clock? Anyways, the evening of March 31st. And I will be there speaking a little bit to the Surrey aspect. So the Broken Promises exhibit is the main exhibit. And then because I live, born, raised in Surrey, I've been working with the city to have more information, more exposure to the stories of Japanese Canadians in Surrey, because I grew up here. I didn't know anything about all the Japanese Canadian history in Surrey. Like, amazing story about all different families, but one big sector was farming, the strawberry farmers in this community, all where there's major Surrey City Hall, major Central Surrey Library is all on land where it used to be Japanese Canadian strawberry farmers. Anyway, lots of stories. So I worked with the curator, and there is a separate side exhibit that has the Japanese Canadian stories of some of the Japanese Canadian Surrey families and their history. And so I'll speak to that. So if any of you are here, thank you so much. So the link's in the chat. Thank you so much. Yeah, it's Pier 21 in Halifax, but we're also encouraging any other museums and wherever you're living, if you have a facility that can host, let them know about the exhibit. It's a traveling exhibit and great stories. And different things we're working on, and that's posted on the NAJC.ca website. Also sign up for our e-news, and that's on the NAJC.ca website, because the NAJC e-news, we post the NAJC, or we'll send you monthly. It's not too much, not too overwhelming, but we'll send you a newsletter that lists the NAJC events. And then also we all promote other of our member organization events and community events. So it's a lot of good information. So please sign up for that. I think I covered everything. Let me know. Did I miss anything?
Somebody asked what time you're speaking.
I believe it's, you know what? Let me just, instead of guessing.
It's 6:30 to 8:30.
6:30 to 8:30 is the event. Thank you.
And lastly, Lorena, the plug-in for the Lillooet Japanese Garden official opening on May 7th. Apparently, they still have a few seats left on the bus.
Yes. So they've got a special bus. You can get more information and cost information, and they have a few seats. So check that out as well. Also, we're on, if you use social media, NAJC is on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And so we post information on those sites as well. Okay. Oops. Oh, yes. And I don't know if the event on March 31st is being live streamed or anything, but sorry, they do have a virtual tour of the Broken Promises exhibit. And that you can find at the Museum of Surrey, or the City of Surrey website, which has the Museum of Surrey information. Oh, and if you get a chance, enjoy the cherry blossoms. Kelvin was saying, Steveston, they're starting. Short time frame, so get out and check those cherry blossoms. I love it. Unfortunately, I do have seasonal allergies, but that doesn't stop me from enjoying the cherry blossoms. Makes me sneeze and cough, but I love it. So I'm going out there. Thank you so much, everyone.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, thanks, Anna. Thank you. She said she found the event through the NAJC Instagram. Yes, and join, there's Japanese Canadians Facebook group as well too. But if you have any questions, I know I ran through it really fast. If you have any questions, just email national@najc.ca and I will answer your questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.